Good morning, everybody. We are here today because the Caribbean finds itself in a modern David and Goliath battle. One that is not with slings and stones, but with data and digital control. The Goliaths in this case are the global tech giants that dominate digital infrastructure, while the Davids are the Caribbean nations and businesses fighting for sovereignty over their data and digital futures. The question is, how do we take control? The answer lies in strategy, policy, and local innovation. Today, we'll explore what's at stake if the Caribbean continues relying on foreign-hosted digital services. We'll discuss the risks of digital colonialism, the role of government policy, and how business and governments can invest in building local, secure digital infrastructure. I'm Dennis Augustin, Collector of People at the DX Alliance. I am a native son of the Caribbean, born in Dominica, and I now call Barbados home. I heard the call to come to contribute to the digital future of this region and have come to enlist in that effort in a regional alliance of digital professionals that includes you. So we hope to hear from you at dxalliance.org. But enough about me. Let's get into it with our panelists. To help us unpack these critical issues, we have a distinguished panel of experts. Eamonn Sheehy, Senior Director of Public Sector at Cloud Carib, an expert in sovereign cloud infrastructure and security. Will be joining us as well, Ingrid Riley, Founder and Editor-in-Chief of Silicon Carib, a leading voice in Caribbean tech journalism and digital transformation, and Michele Marius, Editor of ICT Pulse, who has spent over 2 decades analyzing and advising on ICT telecommunications policy in the Caribbean. Now, the topics we're going to go over today, the growing risk of digital colonialism, building local digital infrastructure, the role of government policy, the challenges of local versus global tech giants, and the intersection of digital sovereignty, identity, and currency. And of course, we'll look forward to your questions and answers at the end of the webinar as well. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Some things to note about the WebEx meeting. Look for the Q&A section to ask questions. Join us in the chat and take the polls on the right. I guess this is the right or that is the right. On your right hand panel under multimedia viewer. Before we dive deeper, let's establish some key terms. The concepts that shape our discussion today and will frame why digital sovereignty is so critical for the Caribbean. First of all, digital colonialism. What is that? The dominance of multinational tech corporations over digital infrastructure, leading to regional dependence and economic loss. Data sovereignty. That's a nation's ability to control its digital infrastructure, data, and regulations without foreign interference. Sovereign cloud. These are cloud services owned and operated within the region, ensuring data compliance and sovereignty. Data localization, as the name might imply, are the legal policies requiring that sensitive national data be stored within the country or region. Hyperscalers. Those are large cloud providers like Amazon, AWS, Microsoft, Azure, the giant players. Data residency refers to the physical location or geographic area where data is stored, particularly servers and data centers, impacting compliance with local data protection, privacy, and security laws. Fun fact, or perhaps not so fun, 92% of data from the United States, from the West, is hosted in the United States. The risk of inaction in this case, it means there could be a loss of data control and security, increased economic vulnerability, exposure to geographical risks and actions, that the Caribbean businesses are becoming mere customers and not innovators. Without this kind of control over our data, we have no control over our future. Now, you've heard enough from me. Let's dig a little bit deeper and hear from Eamonn Sheehy, Senior Director of Public Sector at Cloud Carib, who will outline the current digital sovereignty landscape and why this conversation is more urgent than ever. Over to you, Eamonn.
Thank you, Dennis, and good morning to everybody who's on the call. I think this is really a seminal moment to have a discussion of this nature on digital sovereignty and digital colonialism. And I think I will delve a bit more into these concepts. And I think the real issue for us and the focus for us is on how we can improve our digital sovereignty. That should be the focus. But the consequences of not doing that also need to be clearly understood. And hopefully in this discussion today, we will do that. But before I go into that, I have to do a little bit of, let's say, shameless promotion of Cloud Carib so that everybody understands who we are and some of the terms that we might come across in the course of this discussion. You may hear them again. So I think it's important to understand where we stand. Cloud Carib is a Caribbean company headquartered in the Bahamas, Nassau, Bahamas. We are what is termed a managed service provider. What does that mean for those who are not familiar with these terms? We basically manage cloud infrastructure, our own cloud infrastructure, as well as the infrastructure for other clients. That's at the level of hardware, operating system, database, and cyber security. The one thing that we have that differentiates us significantly from the likes of a Google or an Azure or an AWS is that we have infrastructure across the Caribbean region. We have infrastructure in the Bahamas, Barbados, Jamaica, soon to be in Trinidad and Tobago, and soon to be in Guyana. And we also have infrastructure in Panama and Ecuador. Our focus is on delivering sovereign cloud solutions to both commercial and government clients. And that's, in a nutshell, what we do. You're welcome to go to our website, cloudcarib.com, to get some more information about what we do and the range of services that we provide. So now turning to the actual topic at hand, data sovereignty and digital colonialism and digital sovereignty. Well, first of all, I guess one could say these are two sides of the same coin. But unfortunately, when you have a coin and you flip it, you got a 50-50 chance that it'll land on one side or the other. In this particular discussion, the coin is a little bit heavy-weighted on the side of digital colonialism. And that's just stating a fact of life. So before I talk so much more about the digital colonialism and the sovereignty, I think we need to establish how we got to where we are today. And for those who are hoping for some conspiracy theory, I'm going to disappoint you a little bit on this one, because it has happened more or less organically. Now, when I was starting out back in the day in the early 1980s, you had a computer server or two or three, you stuck them into a room, and then you got a load of disks and you uploaded the software and you ran your applications in-house. You had your PC computer, you installed your Microsoft Office on your computer, and it ran from your computer. And that was fine. There was no issue there about where the data is stored, who had access to the data, etc., because it was inside your own building, inside your own domain and controlled. But along comes the internet, and along comes mobile services. Bandwidth grows exponentially, and it becomes cheaper and cheaper. And the reality then for companies who provide various services, they realize that it's actually much more efficient and cheaper for them to provide platform as a service, software as a service, rather than sending out all of these disks or having people download hundreds of megabytes of data as it was at the time. Coupled with that, then you had the beginning of the online service industry. And one early entry player to this, of course, was Amazon. And Amazon realized that they had a lot of spare capacity in their platform. And the easiest thing for them to do is to monetize that. And thus you have the development of what we now call cloud services and managed services. And many companies who develop software solutions like ERP systems, CRM systems, all of these kind of systems, they realize, well, we don't need to invest in the hardware. We can just use the platforms like an Azure or AWS or a Google platform on which to put our applications and run them as a service. It becomes much less expensive for them. It boosts profits. And on the user side, the user was quite happy because now I don't have the complexity of having to buy the hardware, checking the capacity, then trying to install the software. It doesn't work the first time. How do we get it to work the second time? You just subscribe to a service and you have it. You become a user of that service. The problem becomes when the concentration of these service providers is predominantly in one jurisdiction. So right now, what we have globally, we have these three companies, Meta, Google, AWS, and Microsoft. These companies provide more than 70% of cloud services globally. So there is a significant concentration. And that is where the problem starts to become relevant. Now, it wasn't an obvious problem up until a few years ago, and it started to become clearer when the European Union implemented its GDPR legislation, its data privacy legislation, because companies and governments started to digitize their services. That meant they were putting up sensitive information on systems, and they introduced this data privacy legislation. The problem for the EU was that their data was being hosted by USA companies, and USA companies were covered under US legislation. Things like the Cloud Act and the Patriot Act, for example. So that then becomes a problem. Despite the fact that the European Union bent over backwards to try to find a solution, each time they came up with a solution, they were taken to the European Court and they lost their case. And I think we're on the third or fourth round of this now at this stage. Why does that make a difference for the Caribbean? Well, it makes a difference for the Caribbean because we're kind of following the EU. Our data privacy legislation is very much mirrored on the GDPR legislation of the EU. So the problems and the issues that the EU have are the problems and the issues that the Caribbean will have or are having at the moment because of the overuse of services out of the region in other jurisdictions. And a simple example I think everybody can relate to is Office 365 is one classic example of where everybody is using these tools, which are hosted in the cloud and the data is stored in the Microsoft cloud. So these things matter for us. When we talk about, let's say, colonialism, and we talk about geopolitics, and we talk about commercial exploitation, these are the two fundamental aspects of this. On the commercial exploitation part, it's quite simply that those who own the data, store the data, can make best use of the data. The European Union, late to the table, has identified this. So they have a policy paper now on EU data economy, which they have calculated is worth about 800 billion euros in 2025. So instead of farming out this data to another jurisdiction, they want to develop their own infrastructure, their own sovereign cloud environment, their own digital sovereignty in Europe, so they can monetize their own data and protect themselves from external legal forces and geopolitics. That's the simple statement of fact. So we should be the same in the Caribbean. We have to face the same rationale in the Caribbean. But of course, it's not all, I would say, doom and gloom. There are ways we can mitigate this. Sorry. One thing I did want to say, I just realized that now I skipped ahead there, just to give a couple of examples. So that was the point, a couple of real world examples of how geopolitics, for example, can impact on a country. So we all know that the war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, and because of that war, the EU sanctioned Russia, which meant that Microsoft had to suspend cloud services in Russia. So it cut off the Russian economy, Russian users from a significant platform. There's another example. It's called the Amsterdam Trust Bank, small bank in Amsterdam that employed people. but it happened to be owned by Russians. And in this instance, it was the US government that sanctioned the people. And as a consequence of those sanctions, then they got cut off from their Office 365 platform. They got cut off from Google and AWS environment. So all of their applications were in the cloud. They got cut from all of those. So their operational environment was gone. So it wasn't and the bank collapsed, not because there was any underlying problem with its business model. It just simply relied on external cloud services over which it had no control, and then lost out because of sanctions and got caught in the crossfire. More recently, we have seen, for example, in the ICC, where individuals in the International Criminal Court were sanctioned. There was a fear in that organization that the organization itself could have been sanctioned. And again, all of their systems were in cloud services based in the United States. And they had to act very quickly to shift that to Europe in order to avoid the potential similar fate to the bank, that they'd be cut out of their operational environment. We in the Caribbean are not immune to this. The geopolitical landscape is shifting significantly in the last couple of years. So no matter where you have your data, whether it's in the US, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in the EU, Japan, China, India, wherever you want to have your systems and your data, you have to take into account the geopolitical risk factor. And that risk factor is substantial compared to what it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. And that is why we have to look at whether we're going to be passive users of third country systems, or we're going to be active participants in developing a secure model for the region ourselves. So now, finally, coming on to this, the solutions rather than just talking about the problems. We can, as a region, invest in sovereign cloud infrastructure. Cloud Carib is one example. We've already done it. We have multi-jurisdictional cloud infrastructure and managed cybersecurity in this region. There is a way on a legal basis to enforce perhaps data localization policies for sensitive information like personal identifiable information of Caribbean citizens. We can increase the support of local tech and innovation. One of the jobs that Cloud Carib is doing, or one of our policies right now, is to start partnering with local software vendors, and then using that then when we talk to our clients to offer these solutions to our clients on our platform. So we want to build a regional ecosystem for cloud services and application software. Of course, we also have to strengthen our cybersecurity and compliance footprint. And this is something perhaps we'll come back to later on. We can no longer operate in this region with best endeavors. We need to put in standards, and these standards need to be met. And these are international standards on cybersecurity, on how we handle sensitive data, et cetera, et cetera. We need to build regional alliances. And here I have to give a shout out to the Caribbean Data Center Association. Cloud Carib have recently become a member of this association because we want to build these alliances from data center all the way up to applications within an ecosystem within the region. And where we can't build these relationships and alliances in the region, and we rely on external parties, then we should build strategic international alliances. And here I will give a shout out to one of our partners, a German company called Nextcloud, and they provide a sovereign alternative to Microsoft Office 365. And we ourselves have deployed this in our own cloud as a proof of concept for this region and to offer it as a service. So there are solutions that we can adopt. There are policies that we can adopt. So I think I've said enough now, Dennis, and I'll pass the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Eamonn. And I'm going to get in your amen corner. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of alliances. I believe that is the way that we are going to compete and to defend our sovereignty and also engage with the rest of the world from a position of strength together. So thank you so much for that, for setting the stage, Eamonn. Now, let's explore. Let's explore how we move forward from awareness, as Eamonn has highlighted these issues, to action in our panel discussion. Now, let's start off with a question for both of you here. digital sovereignty, it's not just a technical issue, it's an economic and a political one as well. From your perspectives, what does digital sovereignty mean for the Caribbean, and why does it matter now more than ever? Let's start with you, Michele.
Okay, thanks so much, Dennis. Well, sovereignty, I think, in the Caribbean is such a I want to say simple yet complicated issue. We are all, either existing colonies, former colonies, and so we know what it is to not be in control of our lives and our future. And I think as developing countries in particular, we also have to grapple with the fact that we may end up being at the mercy of forces beyond our control, and Eamonn touched on it in his brief presentation. And I think the same applies with digital sovereignty. We might want to be in control of our data, the infrastructure that we have access to, the technology, the services that we need, and consequently how and why and how long and all of those sorts of questions. But often what we are finding is that we are passive users, and we don't have that sense of control. We may not fully even understand the implications of if we use a service from X or Y, what that means. And what I think we often buy into is the convenience, right? And thus now what we have been seeing, and Eamonn gave us some fantastic examples of how control is being exerted. If you are using a service and overnight you just lose access to it, all of your data that is stored, all of the information, and so the extent to which it can not necessarily just cripple organizations, but countries as well, especially when maybe here in the region we and our governments may not be as the word that comes to mind is strident, but that might be a bit rough, just in terms of ensuring that the data to run the country stays within the country or within the region. So countries can be crippled by that. And even if by chance an international cable is broken or somewhat compromised, if traffic that leaves the region to come back into the region for whatever reason is intercepted or blocked, we are at the mercy of a whole number of forces that we cannot control. So I think that there's so much now, especially when you think about the geopolitical situation, the fact that the economic environment in which we live in, where country competitiveness, business competitiveness, and thus the sorts of vulnerabilities that we are exposed to digitally that can ultimately compromise our continued operations and our societies at large.
Absolutely, and I want to underscore before I ask Eamonn to riff on that same question. You've said there convenience, and there is this stories in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures about somebody who Esau and Jacob, who Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of lentil soup, for the convenience of it, because it was easy, because it was now. And as a result, he lost the opportunity for the thing that was duly his before. And I think we're putting ourselves increasingly in that position. Get the easy and quick fix, but then lose that ability to hold your own data, to build your own capacity. Eamonn, what is the time urgency of all of this? We talk a lot about this progress, and we seem to be taking our time to it. Why does it matter more now than it ever has?
Well, very simply, everybody is digitizing. Governments are digitizing here in the region. There's a lot of talk about innovation in the region. And I think we have to maybe move away from the talking part to the walking part and the doing part. And here, we have to marry the notions of sovereignty and innovation together. We won't have innovation if we don't have sovereignty, plain and simple. If we only, as Michele said, we're only passive users of somebody else's innovation, then we'll just be passive users. But if we talk all the time about we want to be a center of innovation, we want to, whatever it is, we now have the center of innovation on AI and we talk a lot about this, but we have to support the innovation locally, and we have to increase our sovereignty by applying, let's say, our rules to put the sovereignty first, and to ensure that we can build out the ecosystem and infrastructure within the region, and basically to protect ourselves in the region against external geopolitical factors, for example.
Thank you so much. Michele, you've studied the evolution of ICT policy in the Caribbean. How have you seen digital colonialism manifest itself in the region? Give me some examples of how that's manifesting itself, and what are the most pressing risks that we face today?
Okay. I think digital colonialism, well, we have seen it, I think, quite a lot in social media. And I almost feel sorry and bad for saying so, because, social media seems to just get a bad rap. But the truth of the matter is that we, as users, we generate a lot of content that is being mined. Oftentimes, I think it may have changed. Some of the terms and conditions can be quite onerous for accessing these platforms. They require you to agree that the content that you share is with them in perpetuity or for exceedingly long time or terms. And even if they decide, or they have provisions around, deleting the content if you decide to close your account, you're not quite sure whether or not that actually happens. And of course, just the fact that there's considerable revenues that are being generated by the platform owners. And yes, you are, using it for free, but what are you giving up? So the whole issue of convenience and so on comes back. I think that one is actually the most prominent one that I am seeing. We can also talk about, of course, AI, because especially like the technology as it stands now requires large volumes of data to train the AI models. So especially like our large language models, so the chat GPTs and so on of the world. And I think what has emerged over the years, and it may not necessarily be specific to the Caribbean region, is that these large data sets have come from, whether it's copyrighted works or using data available, without the permission of the owners. And so, and maybe, for example, here in the region, one of the things that perhaps, I'm speculating, but just to give an example, is that a big issue that still perpetuates, still continues, is the whole issue of bias. And so, especially maybe in terms of images and the extent to which AI models could recognize people of color and thus their features. And so, here we are in the Caribbean region, lots of people of color, and you wonder about, for example, on your social media accounts, has data been scraped from that to help to train the models? So things like that may actually have occurred, but we don't know for sure. And of course, when now the data sets are being used to train the models, and for example, here it is, we are all excited about AI and using all of these platforms, and we're running, our business data and what could be commercially sensitive data through these models. You don't know what happens to it after it has given you some sort of output. It tends to get stored to be used and applied elsewhere. And so matters related to privacy and data protection, as Eamonn had mentioned, these things now we don't even know. And so I think we ought to just be able to recognize that these things may be happening and put systems in place to help us to better understand the implications of having all of this wonderful technology that we seem to be using for free, and so manage our own the implications in the long run.
You know that there's so many nuggets in what you've just said. You've mentioned about the platform owners, and as we are using these platforms, you know, I've heard people wonder, why is OpenAI losing millions of dollars a month providing their services? And if you think about it, are they really losing millions of dollars, or are they buying millions of dollars worth of data from all of us? And that is actually at the heart of colonialism. Colonialism says that we are the means of production and not the owners of the platforms that produce things. And I think, Eamonn, I mean, when it comes to AI and the kind of infrastructures, we're getting infrastructures from these large giants, and I know that Carib is doing some things in particular with things like compute for AI. Let's talk about local digital infrastructure now. Cloud Carib is leading the charge in providing sovereign cloud solutions. What does it take to build local digital infrastructure, and why is it so crucial for regional independence?
Well, first of all, it's not an easy task to do it. It requires a lot of resources, both human, financial resources. So the company Cloud Carib, we have to employ engineers who are specialists in the physical infrastructure environment, specialists in different operating systems, different database environments. We have to employ cybersecurity specialists, and we run a command control center, C3, which is a 24-hour operation, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, to manage all of our environment and the environments of our clients. So it takes a massive investment in human capital to run a service-oriented organization like us. And of course, also we build out the physical infrastructure across the region, because we want to ensure, as part of our policy, particularly when we're dealing with governments and dealing with sensitive data, that we will put that information in jurisdiction. It won't go to another jurisdiction. And effectively, we are competing against the likes of a Google and an AWS and these kinds of people. And, you know, it's not... One of the things that we face, I would say, is more a mindset. You know, the old adage, nobody got fired for buying IBM. Well, I guess nobody got fired for putting stuff up in AWS or Google, but who is Cloud Carib? But we have the same levels of certifications, and even more than they have. But, you know, we have to change that mindset. Just because it's local doesn't mean it's poor or it's bad. It could also mean that it's very good. So we have to invest a lot in our human capital. It's the primary investment we have. And we have some very good expertise. We also have to invest in certifications. So we have, you know, at least 3 certifications: ISO 27001, SOC 2 Type 2, the Cloud Security Alliance, CSA, STAR certification. So we are independently audited every year by different bodies to maintain our standards for cybersecurity, for how we handle sensitive data, our business practices and procedures internally. We have to have a legal counsel employed. We have to have a chief information and security officer employed. All of these things we have to do in order for us to compete at the global and international level. And that's what we do. And that's what it takes fundamentally to do what we do. On top of that then, and I just give you one example, one small example on cybersecurity. In January of this year, in our own environment, our own cloud environment, plus the cloud services and things we manage for other clients, we had to handle 120 million cyber events in 1 month in January 2025. You can't do that on a 9-to-5 basis. That's a 24-hour job. And I think one of the things that people will have to understand when managing systems here in this region, you can no longer operate on best endeavors, and you can no longer operate on a 9-to-5 mentality. It's 24/7, 365. And people have to be qualified, have to have the experience and expertise, and the organization has to have the certification. And I would just mention, you know, we talk about, let's say, government. In the Caribbean, governments are the ones that will host the PII data of their citizens. as the first stage in digital identity systems or whatever. They'll host it. How many departments, ICT departments of governments in this region have any certifications on cybersecurity, management of sensitive data, these kinds of things? I'm not aware of any. I don't say there isn't, but I'm not aware of any. Now, the question then is, who should you trust to manage your data? An entity like Cloud Carib with the certifications, or somebody who's doing it on best endeavors, and no service level agreements and stuff like this? So we have to change that mindset. We have to look at what's involved in doing this. There's a reason why governments now have, their fleet of vehicles. They don't have mechanics to fix the vehicles. They send them back to the garages that they purchased them from or leased them from because they got the expertise. We're now in a digital age where it's very complex. The question has to be asked, who should be running these things? Is it the experts or somebody else? That's a crucial policy decision to be made in my estimation. So I think that's one of the most important messages I think I would have to get across today. And one last point on this notion on the AI. I'm happy to say that we in Cloud Carib, we're doing implementations of what we call sovereign AI. So we're deploying AI servers in the region to do specific use cases for the use of AI. So not a general massive big model, but we are doing proof of concept for specific use cases because we find that's the best way to actually implement AI without having to cost an arm and a leg or to use services, as Michele has said, the ChatGPTs of this world, and you hand out your sovereign and your intellectual property to these people. So we are deploying and we're doing proof of concepts with sovereign AI solutions within the region. That's our mantra, is sovereign. Sovereign is our mantra for the company.
And Eamonn, you've touched on the mindset change that needs to happen, and I think that is part of the legacy of that colonialist history. That we have a narrative that says to us that that the leaders don't come from here, but I love technology. Technology changed my life 27 years ago because I knew my code could compile as good as anybody else's on earth. And my certifications showed that I knew what I'm doing, and the decades that I've spent in the field made me confident that we were able to do it. And so we have to lean into that expertise. And I'll also echo what you said about having experts take on that role. So we're talking about empowering experts rather than making decisions perhaps in small political cycles. I think that the mindset that says the decisions for you will be made in some room where you're not in is, again, a colonialist mentality that we need to break, because change happens from the ground up and not from the top down. We're kind of done with kings, especially here in Barbados, being the republic that we are. But Michele, let me get off of my pulpit just for a second and ask you again from a policy standpoint. What regulatory measures of the Caribbean nations need to prioritize in order to ensure that digital infrastructure remains under regional control?
Okay, well, Dennis, I kind of have plenty to say on this, but I'll of course make it quick. But I think there's so much that we can do. In his opening remarks, Eamonn had talked about data protection, the laws, GDPR. And so I think one of the first things that we can do is to just get our privacy and data protection laws up to date and fully operational. What we have across the region is that, yes, some countries have aligned their legislation with GDPR, but that GDPR came into effect, I think, about oh gosh, what year was it? I think 2017, 2018, but I think it came into was produced in 2016 or thereabout, 2016. The point being though that countries would probably have GDPR aligned legislation once they develop their laws after that time. But we have a fair number of countries who had laws in place before that. So the world was different back then. I mean, the conversations we're having now would not necessarily be what would have been occurring when those laws were conceptualized. So moving to have the laws fully enforced, up to date, and have the requisite oversight in place, regulatory oversight, because oftentimes you're required to have like a data commissioner or office of the information commissioner or something. And yes, those provisions might be in the law, but they have not been operationalized. So we really have to strengthen that. We also need to be focusing on developing a cybersecurity, AI, and other sort of data governance guidelines, rules, regulations as necessary. As it relates to cybersecurity, and this is a little bit of a pet peeve for me, we have cybercrime laws, but we don't have any guidelines for organizations as to what should be the sort of cybersecurity requirements that they should adhere to. It would not necessarily, of course, be foolproof or infallible or anything, but at least to show that we are being security focused and not necessarily just looking to prosecute crimes after they have occurred. So being more proactive. And of course, use of AI, that the national policy on AI across the region is unclear. So you have both the private and public sectors using AI, and we can probably, let's say, start with the private sector. Different ministries and governments may have different ways or how they use AI, but it is not structured. Are we clear about the data sets, what can be used in AI, citing that we have used AI to generate certain content or information, etc. So different sorts of provisions around that. I also think, though, that from an infrastructure, since we're not necessarily just looking at data sovereignty, but digital sovereignty, we also need to consider how to keep the data in the region. And granted that, Eamonn is focused, and Cloud Carib are focusing on sovereignty. I would also like to just indicate that most Caribbean countries have what's called an internet exchange point, which is supposed to keep traffic local, right? If I'm based in Jamaica, I'm wanting to send an email or have some sort of digital communication with someone, does it have to go to Miami to come back to Jamaica when we are just, on the same island? And so I think focusing on making IXPs more effective could help with that. And there could also be scope for a regional IXP. If I want to send you something in Barbados, Dennis, does it have to go to Miami to do so? Can we keep regional internet traffic within the region? And so again, help to maintain a certain amount of sovereignty within the region. And just moving on to I think my final point here is just about using regional data centers. We do have world-class data centers here, and it probably is going to be increasingly important for our countries, our governments in particular, to adopt policies to use those regional centers as opposed to storing data outside the region where we don't have control. And because I focus on government first, because here in the region, governments tend to be the drivers of a lot of the behavior and the action, because we all have to interact with government at some point. And so they can often help to be the leaders in how we adopt and adapt moving forward.
Michele, I mean, I love that you focus on that policy, because ultimately some of the change that we can make with the stroke of a pen, which is powerful. But you've said as well, at the same breath, it's not just the writing of the policy in terms of things like, that security and whatnot. It's not great to have a security plan that just sits on your desk in the drawer. You need to also have enforcement of these things and operationalization of them. So these are things that we can most definitely do without a lot of barriers. So let me just stay with you just for a second, Michele, as we follow up on that. There's smaller Caribbean tech providers who struggle to compete with the multinational corporations. What are the biggest challenges do you feel that they face, and what can we do to level that playing field?
Oh, I've been looking at that question since it came up. And I think the big thing, though, and it has to be, I think there are two things I think I want to say. The first thing is that I think the biggest challenge to Caribbean tech businesses is one of scale. When we focus on the English-speaking Caribbean in particular, our markets are small. I mean, Montserrat has a population of probably about 5,000. Jamaica, yes, it may have a population of close to 3 million, but I think that the cost sustainability / profitability dynamic can be quite tenuous. So I really think, though, that to start to try to level the playing field, we ought to be thinking regionally, regional markets. And don't create a solution just for your little country, for your population, and just to solve your very local problem. Maybe with a little bit of tweaking, you can create a regional solution that can also be applied in other developing regions or countries around the world. So I really think that that is something to consider. The second point I want to make, and it's something that I've been thinking of a little bit more recently, is that we are using the sort of lens of Silicon Valley. So you're looking at high growth, and if you're not making, $100 million, nobody, you're about, I think, the value that you're offering, and not getting too tripped up on the actual, numbers. If you are making, let's say, $10 million in revenue, but your operating costs is 500,000 for a year, you are probably doing far better than a company that is, generating $100 million in revenue, but has an operating cost of, 75 million or something. So I think there's also value, I think, in niche areas, in scarcity, because we often talk about, and I did say to, my own admission about scale, we think about having to scale the business and scale to create maximum profit, but there can also be value in being, very selective in the services that you're offering. So I think there has to be a mind shift in terms of how we qualify and really even think about how we level the playing field. But the whole issue of the regional approach, I think, is something that could help us, not necessarily just in terms of businesses, but even the tech providers, the infrastructure. So a lot of the things that Eamonn had mentioned earlier, I think, comes back to us really looking more as a region and not even just as individual countries to ensure that we become actually more competitive and that we are truly offering the greatest value to the largest number of people.
Absolutely. I mean, and there you go back to the regional alliances that we must form so that we can compete together, and also getting over the scarcity mentality, because if we are able to build capacity here and have the appropriate legislation, I think we could also become attractive to other jurisdictions in that sense as well. So I think we got to look at this as an opportunity, as well as the challenge that it is. Eamonn, as we go on, and we're getting on with time here, so we'll keep all of our answers fairly brief. But what does the current procurement process in the Caribbean, and you and I have talked about procurement before, just recently on one of the BCCI Talks business shows. What do we need to do with the current procurement processes in the Caribbean? They seem to favor global providers over local ones. How can governments and business shift towards supporting local solutions?
Well, Dennis, I'm going to just briefly upset you by not answering that question, but just following on from what Michele had said.
Sure.
But very brief. Because I raise this thing every time I have these kinds of discussions. And as Michele was talking about the market size of the Caribbean being relatively small and needing to operate on a regional level, fully agree with that. Not only for commercial companies, but governments should be doing the same thing too. Procurement at a regional level would save governments a lot of money on implementation. But just to throw this thing in, we do have an economic partnership agreement with the European Union. And in that economic partnership agreement, services are covered, including ICT services. The problem we have in this region is we won't meet the standard for data privacy rules for hosting EU PII data. If we were to fix that problem at the regional level, we could have access to a market of 450 million people in Europe. And that market might be more open to us to do business with us than many other markets. And nobody is looking at this. This IPA has been there. It was one of the first projects I worked on back in 2007 or 8 when I came to Barbados first to live. So there is an IPA. It exists. There are possibilities, but we have to do some steps to make these possibilities a fact. So sorry about that. Yeah. Just wanted to say that. On the procurement side, I can't say that the policies favour global providers. I think that's maybe a little bit of a stretch. But I think the mindset, and this is going back to what we said earlier on about the mindset of people, there's more comfort in choosing a known brand than choosing an unknown brand, even if it's local. And that is the mindset we have to get over. Now, I give you one example, which I think is very useful. The government of Bermuda, when they issue RFPs for their ICT, and I guess these are self-funded projects, they give 30% of the selection criteria marks to entities that have an investment in their economy. They have boots on the ground, they have an office there, they have people employed, whatever that putting back into the community, whatever that is, you can get up to 30% of the marks. And that's a very positive thing because it means that you get an investment back into the region. Now, when it comes to, particularly for governments in this region, yes, most of the funding and big funding comes from IADB, World Bank, etc. And they have particular procurement rules which are not the local government ones. But I think even there, I think these entities need to look more at these procurement rules and provide some flexibility to engaging, local entities. Because you can't, on the one hand, be saying, oh, we want to support innovation in the region. And then on the other hand, saying our procurement rules can't support that because you don't meet the capacity standard or whatever the hell it is that you have to meet. So you can't say we're supporting this and then not support it by doing something different. So I think procurement rules for IDB, World Bank should be looked at and addressed to level that playing field and make it more likely for a regional or a local company to actually win a project of that nature, as opposed to predominantly buying software that's already developed in one of the first world donor countries. We will never innovate if all we do is become consumers, and that's all we're doing, becoming consumers.
We have to embrace becoming those producers and owners of the solutions, and we have to embrace it now because those opportunities are rapidly slipping by, and if we become beholden to those things, we will be beholden to them for a long time. And I will scold you for that, and I'm going to give you another chance to redeem yourself, Eamonn, with a follow-up, hopefully brief reply on this one. As Caribbean continues its digital transformation, we're seeing increased discussions around national identification systems, global passports, digital IDs, and even digital currencies. While those innovations promise convenience and efficiency, they also introduce some new questions about digital sovereignty. How do you see those developments affecting the region? What are the risks of those kind of emerging trends that we're seeing in IDs, global passports, digital currencies, and if we don't secure those kinds of control of those things now?
Well, okay, I mean, I'll certainly try to make it brief. I think, first of all, there are some very positive impacts for implementing these kinds of solutions. If one takes just simply digital identity, or we in Cloud Carib have been promoting the concept of mobile digital identity. We think based on the demographics, that should have been something that was done some time ago, because it unlocks a huge potential for financial services, easier banking, for businesses, payment systems, all of these different things. On the negative side, now you're talking about very sensitive data and how to secure that sensitive data. And that is going back then to what I had mentioned before about, if you're going to have this kind of, digital identity data in systems, who manages these systems? What are the qualifications for those managing the systems? Because now it becomes much more critical. Now you're certainly going to be attracting far more cyber threats than perhaps before, when these systems didn't exist. So there is certainly an opportunity to make them to put these systems in place and improve the efficiency of the economy and create innovation in the economy. The downside is we have to have the infrastructure, we have to have the cybersecurity policies, and we have to implement them. So I think, I think it would be fair to say in this region that we're very good at producing the legislation, but the implementation part then becomes another issue. So whether it's data privacy, having a data privacy commissioner, but then they have to have the staff, you have to actually, manage the process and enforce the laws and enforce the processes. So enforcement is an issue. There's a lot of positives that could come out of it, particularly with the implementation of digital identity. I think that would be one of the core ones for improving certainly government services.
And absolutely, it's one of the most important things is that enforcement of that, as I think, as Michele, you've noted as well. Those policies have to be enforced. So, given your expertise in ICT policy, Michele, how should governments approach implementing things like digital identity and currency systems, and in what ways do we protect national and regional sovereignty while ensuring the kind of innovation and accessibility and security that we need?
Okay. I think, well, Eamonn gave us some insights into that already. I think the whole issue of trying to keep the data local or regional is going to be critical. And I think especially when we start to look at more regional approaches, because even with digital identities and the currency systems, we're looking at cross-border trade within the regions, being able, all of the benefits that should be realized under CSME, so free movement of people, etc. And so ensuring that I think that having that sort of data within the region, trying to ensure that we're using localized solutions that can be maintained at the very least within the region, hopefully created within the region as well, because you do have open source options that can be at least customized for our own needs. So, I think those are some of the key things that we can do going forward.
And and because of those open source things, we can do them at very low costs as well, which is very favorable. But we have a question from my friend, Mr. Lewis from the CTU, who's on the call as well. So what is the plan for dealing with the Internet of Things, the IoT devices, since the data captured from these devices can bypass regional cloud-based solutions, limiting Caribbean control over its own data? So, Eamonn, do you have some thoughts on IoT and perhaps the likelihood of that kind of bypassing our own structures? And what comments do you have on plans with regards to IoT?
Well, everything is a risk, and you have to measure what the risk is. So yes, the Internet of Things can present risks. I mean, we have examples of, Siri and these things listening to people's conversations and stuff like this. So we know these things exist already. Nobody's forcing you to buy these things, to put them in your house and to activate them, because you have to activate them. You have to attach them to your internal network. So the data, so there are things you can do to block these things, the information going out from your own internal network that it's connected to. And it depends on, that's like how long is the piece of string, because it depends on what data is going out, how important that data is, because it's the same thing when you go browsing using, your Chrome browser. Information is being gathered by Google all the time. Does that mean you don't use Chrome or you don't use a browser? So I think it's a difficult one to answer, but the starting point would be to A, not turn it on, and B, how you manage it inside your own network. And maybe that will create a whole new sector to improve security in home networks and stuff like this as well. Because certainly within the context of a business, businesses should be taking care of these kinds of things within the context of the business from a cybersecurity point of view. It should be part of their cybersecurity profile if they're implementing physical devices that have Internet of Things capabilities on them.
Well, and and then you've rightly pointed out that creates opportunities for us to create solutions around that. So that it's wonderful that we can actually, with the policies, create those opportunities and create a safer environment for us all. But we want to hear a little bit more from all of you. I mean, that was a great question from Rodney, but we also want to hear from you in the polls. So the first poll you see right there in front of you, if you had to choose the most urgent factor in achieving digital sovereignty, which one would it be? Government policy and regulations, local infrastructure development, or public awareness and adoption? The second poll, of course, let's go to the next one as well, poll question. And we want to do that as we fill out these polls as we continue the discussion and you pose your own questions. When choosing a cloud or digital services provider, what influences your decision the most? So is it data security, sovereignty and privacy protections, cost and affordability, brand reputation, like Eamonn pointed out? Is it the trusted global providers that you're interested in? Or is it government regulations and compliance that drives your decisions? Looking forward to hearing from you on that. All right, the third poll. How concerned are you about geopolitical tensions and foreign policies affecting the Caribbean access to digital services? I think that recent events have made that very much an issue. So very concerned, somewhat concerned, not concerned at all, or just unsure. Let us know what you think about that as well. So we're going to give you a few minutes there to answer those questions. Again, if you're answering, the polls and the access to the Q&A is just on your bottom right-hand side of your screens as well. I'm going to ask my colleagues who have been watching the chat there if we have some other questions at this time. We can then, okay. I'm sorry, I'm trying to grab the Q&A box and I don't see that. So if somebody could just put that into, oh, there, I've got it now. All right. We've answered Mr. Lewis's. Here's one from Craig. Actually, I think it's skipping around on me. Taking a broad view of sovereign architecture, how digital sovereignty fits into the broader architecture. I'm thinking, not be a provider. Okay, somebody's asking Eamonn, what stops Cloud Carib from not being acquired by Microsoft or Google in the future? You're talking about digital infrastructure and we're wishing for your great success. When you're all successful, are you going to get swallowed up by Goliath?
Well, apart from the fact that that's above my pay grade, I think it would be rather difficult for that to happen based on the ethos of the company. But obviously, you know, I can't speak to the owners of the company for sure. But yes, it's a valid question to ask. Of course it is, but it's not something that's certainly on the horizon at all at the moment, not even close to a consideration at the moment. And I think we'd be very foolish to promote services in the region and promote sovereignty in the region and all of these things to turn around and ditch all of that, having built up a clientele. Because for us, we want to maintain a company in the region and we want to have our clientele over the long haul. We're a pure services company in that regard, and we live and die by the service levels that we provide. So I think, you know, from a political and philosophical point of view, I don't see that happening.
Very good. Thank you so much, Eamonn. And I think that's, you know, as I know some of the folks from Cloud Carib and just ideologically, and you know, they really are leaning into that. That's why you see the revolutionary imagery in the logo that we have for the Alliance. So one of the reasons why we're partners with Cloud Carib is because I say ideologically, purpose-wise, we see the value in wanting to contribute to this region. And yes, if somebody wants to invest in us, I mean, that's one thing, but to be swallowed up by them is kind of antithetical to our purpose here. So thank you for that answer. Now, I understand that the
Dennis,
poll results are live. Yes, go ahead, Eamonn.
Sorry, one last comment on that. I would say that the Caribbean region for a company like a Microsoft or a Google is not that important. And we can measure that by the fact that they have no infrastructure None of the big companies have any infrastructure in the region. So they don't necessarily consider this region as an important for their economic well-being. Whereas we as a smaller company, this is our region, this is our backyard for our own economic well-being.
Exactly. And that goes to our own sustainability. If we do get swallowed up, we're back at the same point again, being the vassals of other people. If we get swallowed up by them, those dollars flow, where, not here. So we asked a question and the poll results are up right now. So if you had to choose the most urgent factor in achieving digital sovereignty, which one would it be? And 32% of you, this is a close one actually, said the government policy and regulations. Michele, you got some work to do on that front. Local infrastructure and development was 16% of that, and public awareness and adoption bringing up the rear with 13% of, but of course, those of you on the call very much a very aware crew, so that maybe that does not surprise me in that regard. Let me just go right here to see if we have some of the other poll questions in. I'm just going to go back here. Very good. Pardon me while I just flip through some of these images. When choosing your digital service provider, what influences your decisions the most? Again, so 13% of you said data security, sovereignty, and privacy. So Eamonn, you're good stead with your certifications and processes. Cost and affordability was second at 10%. Brand reputation, only 4%. So Eamonn, they care more about what you deliver than the appearance, which is great news. And nobody said the government regulations are what's driving their decision with regards to who they choose for infrastructure. I think that perhaps that might be a good thing, that you're prioritizing security over just what the government's making you do.
But that might be problematic, because if you have data privacy, like in Jamaica, they're very good on the data privacy stuff. You might not be meeting the regulations of government by hosting in a certain jurisdiction or using a certain supplier. And that means you could get significantly fined, or I think in the case of Jamaica, you could end up in prison. So maybe they want to revisit that particular issue in more detail.
I think yes. Well, avoiding prison is high on my list of priorities for my life. So I'm going to be a good guy in that regard. And most of you, of the ones that answered, when we talked about the geopolitical things, the number one was very concerned. And I think we should be very concerned indeed, very prudent to be so. But I want to thank you all for joining the webinar here today and for your answers to your questions. I want to thank our panelists, Eamonn and Michele. Thank you so much for your responses. It really helps us to understand what's top of mind for all of you in your Q&A. Of course. And I think that's about it. In the end, folks, we were talking about David and Goliath here. But David didn't win by becoming stronger. He didn't win by being stronger, by being bigger and stronger than Goliath. He won by being more strategic. And I think that's something that the Caribbean needs to do in the same way as we seek to make digital sovereignty a reality here. If it's all good with you, thank you, Michele, for joining us here today, and Eamonn as well. Let's stay together. Let's keep these alliances strong, and let's succeed together. Thank you all.